Assalamualaikum and a very good day. Um, I'm Zaini Haryati from the Faculty of Applied Sciences, UiTM Shah Alam. Thank you for being with me, where I'm going to give you some tips on how to conduct your postgraduate research, particularly your master's and PhD research work, and focusing on how to carry out the correct research method that resulted in obtaining reliable results from your chosen methods that you have planned earlier before you carry out the methods. So before I start, two important questions that you must ask yourselves, which why do you embark or pursue into a postgraduate research? So to get the answer why of you uh, registered yourself as a postgraduate research by research, uh, you put yourself in uh, responsible to carry out research. So you must know how to conduct a research project. So by answering these main important questions on being a postgraduate student that carrying out research work, so you must know what are you doing. So this presentation consists of three parts. The first part involve the skills, the other skills, the soft skills of being a postgraduate students. Apart from you have research and technical skills, you must have communication skills. You have being a professional researcher and being responsible in conducting your research work. The second part is more on the technical part on how to identify research topic, developing research questions, how to collect data, and how to frame your research hypothesis. And the last part is I would like to share some attributes of being a good postgraduate researcher. So we're going to the first part where this talk will focus on how to conduct research methodologies, where this part is being designed after you've gone through the foundation of doing research, that is identification of your research topic. And then from your research topic, you build up on how the problem formulation, what are the problems that you are going to solve. From the problem, you get your objectives and your research scope, and then you do your literature review, where you extracting and criticize others researchers work that is similar to your work, and from these three preliminary step or early steps of doing research, then you identify the methods that you are going to carry out um, doing your research. So of course, if you're going to embark into your research, you're going to be an expert of the field of study. So like if you want to work on nanomaterial, you must at least have backgrounds of material science, chemistry, physics. So you need to become proficient in the study design, your background. If you want to do research in social science or psychology, at least you must have a background from that area. So apart of that, you must have also the ability to think creatively, where we would want you to propose an innovative solution to the scientific problems. Okay, and from the experiments that you have carried out, you get data, and how you going to analyze your data, and then you must share your research finding through publications and also um, presentation. That here the communication skills are needed, like good in writing, editing, speaking, presentation skills, and this is all what researchers do. So in terms of professionalism as a researcher, there are rules and regulation where we must follow a workplace ethic, like the rules and regulation in the labs, and also just be a good colleague. uh, you must be or responsible at your workplace, the cleanliness, the work during the schedule, do not make noise, something like that. And also you also encouraged to participate in extracurricular departmental functions, where these activities are a great way to build your network, gain experience, and demonstrate your commitment into your field of study. Like if you're from applied science, you can join the postgraduate student society and contribute something to your field. And this can also be very important to your professional advancement as well. Um, Responsible of conduct to conduct a research also need the foundation of trust, where we maintain the integrity of your experiment, of your data. So a careful record keeping is a paramount, is important, where for in my experience, I ask my students to keep their logbook with them and record every single observation that they find from their experiment. Researchers need to be well versed in data ownership, in data keeping, and how they share their data, um, so that your data is secured and not being manipulated by others. Okay, where if you do research that uh, in research that is using animal and human as samples, you must have the ethics from your universities. So there must you must understand the standards of authorship, where you are the first author, or you are the second author, or you are the corresponding author, which one, so you can discuss this with your supervisors. You should be also be able to identify and manage research misconducts, and real and perceived conflicts of interest when you encounter them, because failure to manage these issues well could damage your reputation and lead to your poor performance evaluations, and even you might be terminated from doing your research. So we move on to the second part, more on the technical of identification of research topic, developing a research question, how to collect data, and framing your hypothesis. This is the cycle of doing research. So it starts from the beginning on how to select a good research topic. Selection of a good research topic involves a good definition of the problem that you are working on. And also, to define the problem, you must do a very thorough literature review. And from that, from your readings and findings from the other researchers, you formulate a hypothesis that what are your intention, uh, uh, the results that you want to get. Okay, so then from the hypothesis that you have built, you select a research design. That is the method, the experiment, the survey, observation. You want to conduct interviews or use the existing data. You extract data from Malaysian Statistic, Jabatan Statistik Malaysia, and whatnot. And that is how you design your research method here. Then you carry out the research where you collect your data, and then you interpret your data, analyze your data, and then you report your findings. And from the findings, it might get to a new problems that you encounter, and then it go back to the problem, and you do the definition again and do the reading, and then it goes on and on. So identification of a proposed research topic for science, or also social science, you must have a little bit of your scientific knowledge or your background. This is the knowledge, your background knowledge that you must have. You also need to know the content of your research. Like for science, like now the coronavirus, COVID-19, the evolutions of the virus itself, from just in within 2 years it changed. So here science is dynamic, so there's a lot of things, of new things to learn, relearn, and understand. And then here, identification of a proposed research topic, you must be able to critically evaluate the scientific literature from your readings, a lot of readings. You must critically evaluate the like for coronavirus, the structure, the genomics, the optimum condition of the spread of this disease, and many more. So it's not just reading, it's a critical evaluation of your reading. So here are the steps in developing a research question. So choose an interesting general topic, and then do some preliminary research on your general topic. Then consider your audience, where you want to report your research to Kementerian Kesihatan, to Jabatan Keselamatan dan Jabatan Kesihatan Negara, or only to the faculty members So where you want to report it, consider your audience worldwide or locally only. So there is we are talking about the scope of your research, and then start asking questions. Then evaluate your questions. Is your research question clear? Is your research question focused? So, or is it too general? Okay, be focused in developing a research questions. And then, is your research question complex? Okay, how often begin with how or why, and then you begin your research. So here are some essential steps in conducting scientific research. That is the literature review, and I understand that other presenter have touched on how to do a good literature review, because from the literature review we will get the methods that we want to run the experiment. So it goes back on the importance of the literature review. From your readings, you will identify your research question. You will be able to develop a clear research objective, and then you will be able to choose the right methods. Okay. So here are the research process. Again, it starts from the research question, then you design your research, then you collect your data and discuss, and also, and is it the conclusion, the data that you have found, the conclusion, does that answer your research questions? So the research process link um, the um, the research questions with the conclusion. It's always what is your research questions and the conclusion. Conclusion must answer your research questions. And how do you come to get a good conclusion? You must get a good methodologies. Now, how we want to collect data to make a conclusion? Of course, the data comes from correct methodologies. Okay, choose the right methodologies in conducting your research. Okay, and also even though you have a good methodology, you have run lots of experiment with lots of data, but if you don't keep a good record keeping of your data, it will go worthless. Okay, so you must have a discipline in conducting your experiment, as well as in managing your data. So research is knowledge acquisition gained through reasoning, through intuition, but most importantly through the use of appropriate method. Okay, this is what we call the scientific research method. We must use appropriate methods to carry out experiment in achieving your research objectives. So how do you choose a correct methodologies? Okay, you need to define the scientific method and scientific thinking principle that in doing research. Okay, describe the main concept of measurement and various sampling methods. You explain the general concept of an experiment and a quasi-experiment and outline uses of this design in research. You contrast a range of research designs and methods and be able to identify the strengths and weaknesses of each method. This is achieved uh, through researchers. So other researchers might use other methods. So which methods from your literature, from your reading, which are the methods that is best used to achieve your research objective. So you have to select appropriate research designs and research method to address hypothetical and real world problems. So three basic elements of the scientific methods are empiricism, determinism, and skepticism. Okay, the empirism is the notion that inquiry is conducted through observation and knowledge verified through evidence. Determinism, determinism, the notion that events occur according to regular laws and causes. The goal of research is to discover this, that the findings that from your experiment you conducted, you get the results that obey certain law, okay, like Newton laws, Fick's laws, etc. Skepticism, the notion that any proposition is open to analysis and critique. For your research objective, uh, it, there must be a smart element in your research objective. Your research objective must be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. So the verbs that are suggested here, like to describe a model, to explain the law of, to evaluate, to compare the method A with method B, to correlate the the weather with the spread of the disease, to predict, to control, to simulate, to model, to determine, to validate, to synthesis, to measure, to obtain, or to develop, to evaluate the performance of something. So these are examples and the verbs used in constructing a smart research objectives. What is a scientific method generally? It's from the questions. Choose a question for us to investigate, and then you identify the hypothesis that related to the question and make a testable prediction. That is the hypothesis here, and then you design the experiment to answer the hypothesis questions. And then you collect data in doing your experiment, and then you determine results and assess their validity, and then you determine if the results support or refute your hypothesis. So for now, can you write your research questions and share with your friends? Take note that your research question must be focused and clear. So why do I ask you to share with your friend? Let your friend ask how, why, what, where, um, so that your research question is getting clearer and clearer and clearer until your friend really understand what are you going to do in a very layman conversation. So now you write your research objective and share with your friend. So just two research objective for a master degree, and at least three research objective for a PhD candidate. Why I need you to share with your friends? Let he or she ask you what, how, where, and explain it to them until your research objectives are very clear and very precise. Um, I want to share on the scientific method an example of scientific and social science research. This is a clinical study. Okay, but it also have a social science element in this scientific research. So the title is suspicion that a factor of exposure to something, like suspicion that a factor of exposure to yourself with coronavirus patient will influence the occurrence of the disease or a noted health outcome. So this is a suggested title. So it might be only observation in clinical practice. You can examination of the disease and get like a test, a diagnosis test. You use an ELISA kit to test it. If you are near to the patient, do you also get the disease? So you examine the patient, okay? And also the suspected patient. This is only hypothesis. Or also, and you can also observe in a lab where you can carry out on animals, okay? Or this is only a theoretical speculation. So from this title, we can do 4 types of statement. Okay, this is only a statement. Okay, you can just observe it, you do the examination, and you observe in the lab, or is just only a theoretical speculation. So a basic question in this research is, are exposure and disease or outcome linked between one another? So E is exposure, D is disease. Is E linked to D? Is there an association between E and D? So we want to look at the effect of E towards D. Okay, so we want to link them. This is the basic question. So we want to design the study. How are we going to link uh, E and D? Okay, so there are many kinds of study design, maybe case series, cross-sectional, case control, or randomized control clinical trials. You can go do cohorts, and there are lots of study designs. So from the result of your study, does a statistical relationship exist between two or more events, characteristic or other variables? So there are lots of variables there in your study. Is there any statistical relationship between all the variables with between exposure and disease outcome? So the association of E and D involves lots of variables like temperature, like distance, like lot more variables. Okay, so the factors that involve the association between exposure and disease, we call that variables. And then, what is statistical association? It is the degree to which the rate of disease or outcome in person with a specific exposure is either higher or lower than the rate of disease or outcome among those without that exposure. So then we want to assess the validity of the association. Does the observed association really exist? Is the association valid? Are there an alternative or many alternative explanation for the association. Okay, so we have to assess the validity of association. um, why we need to come up with a hypothesis? Because we want to shape and guide your research study. From here, we can identify the study sample size and what issues should be involved in data collection and the proper analysis of data, and also data interpretation. So, how to formulate a hypothesis? Okay, so your hypothesis must be testable. Okay, not only you formulate your hypothesis, it must be also testable. So here are ways on how to formulate your hypothesis. Again, you must read a lot. It's from natural experiments, like for coronavirus, the migration of people from Korea, from Japan, from China to other parts of the world might be um, the cause of the evolution of coronavirus to other parts of the world. Okay, we can also do multinational comparisons. Okay, we can also um, read descriptive study, assessment of person, place, and time characteristics, and also maybe from your own creativity, you can formulate your hypothesis. So these are example for the population, the world population of the mortality and incidences of cervical cancer. So like we want to study about the relationship between cervical disease and population. So can you come out with a hypothesis from this data? So infectious and chronic diseases show great variation from one country to another. There are some differences may be attributed to climate, cultural factors, diet, and also genetics. So descriptive study design used to help formulate hypotheses, where case series approach, you can identify the experience of a group of patients with similar diagnosis, or identify the experience of a group of individuals with an exposure in common. Population survey approach, you can describe issues related to disease or exposure in population. Okay, usually it relies on routinely collected data from established surveillance or notifiable disease system. That is the population survey approach. So three essential characteristics that we look to measure in descriptive studies are person, place, and time. So person, since disease does not occur at random, what kind of people tend to develop a particular disease and who tends to be spared? What's unusual about those people? If we can relate with the current situation in coronavirus, maybe the elderly people are tend to develop this disease severely as compared to younger ones. So person factor, age, gender, race, ethnicity, genetic predisposition, concurrent disease, diet, exercise, smoking, and risk-taking behavior, and others. So place, since disease does not occur at random, where is the disease especially common or rare, and what is different about those places that we have to take into account. So please factor that residence, the occupation, the climate, geology, population density. If we can compare the population density in Italy and Singapore in combating COVID-19, I don't know. Economic development, nutritional practices, and also medical practices. Time factor, the time, calendar time, time since an event, date of onset, age, seasonality, okay, and also temporal trends. So, hypothesis framing here, traditionally H now is we assume, and H1 is the alternative hypothesis. So, for example, H null, there is no association between the exposure and disease of interest. But H1, there is an association between the exposure and disease of interest. So, these are our hypotheses. Okay, you have H null and H1. Another type of framing, you might consider what is the best estimate of the risk of disease in those who are exposed compared to those who are unexposed. Okay. Um, Ways to express hypothesis. Okay, from the data, okay, you can suggest a possible event. If there is no lockdown, the disease might be increased, maybe. Okay, the rate of survival of some disease, cancer, will increase after a surgery, maybe. Okay, ways to express hypothesis. You can also suggest. Okay, and then you also suggest the relationship between specific exposure and health related event, like a high cholesterol intake is associated with the development of coronary heart disease. Suggest cause-effect relationship. For example, cigarette smoking is a cause of lung cancer. One-sided versus two-sided. One-sided example, Helicobacter pylori infection is associated with increased rate of stomach ulcer. Two-sided example, weightlifting is associated with risk of lower back injuries. So, some guideline for hypothesis framing. You state the exposure to be measured as specifically as possible, and then you state the health outcome as specifically as possible. So just now we have the E and D. So what are the specific exposure, and what is this? What is the specific health outcome? So some example of poor hypothesis here. Eating junk food is associated with the development of cancer. You can see this is junk food is so very general big statement, as well as cancer, because we have lots of specific kinds uh, cancers. Okay, be specific on which food or maybe a molecule. Go zoom very deep into what that is associated with, like breast cancer, colon cancer. Be specific. So a good one, the human papillomavirus HPV subtype disease is a very specific virus, is associated with the development of cervical cancer, a very specific cancer. So your hypothesis must also be specific and clear. So the next step is, after you have formulated your hypothesis, you must carry out your research methods to prove your hypothesis. Okay, so study designs or research method direct how the investigation is conducted and allows for the translation of a conceptual hypothesis into an operational one. Um, Lastly, I will share on the attributes of being a good postgraduate researcher. So you must understand the role and responsibility of a postgraduate researcher. You must have you must be perseverance in conducting your research, independent, a problem solver. You must have creative thinking. You must able to take action and not just plan and plan and plan. The first 10 experiment will you will not get a good result, so keep on doing your experiment. You must surround yourself with a supportive friends and family members. Join other activities like sports and hobby, and being an open-minded person as well. Okay, for Muslim, you must believe that if we read, then we'll understand. We'll get the understanding because the knowledge comes from our Creator.